and we got I interviewed Richard in a little jail cell in San Francisco many years ago, and it was a pretty feisty little interview. We're in this room that's about 5 by 8 with a little metal table in it, and he and I are sitting there, sort of going after each other a little bit for some minutes, and it was an obviously it's the most famous interview I have ever done by a long shot, and a very interesting experience.
Did you sense any evilness in the room from him, or what was your perception of him at that time?
Yeah.
Especially after visiting some of the family that, before you interviewed him, to really get, the emotion of what the kind of crazy stuff that he was doing.
Yeah. I've interviewed a number of serial killers and sat face to face with a number of killers. And when you're face to face with them, they're not nearly as scary as you
think they're just cowards, huh?
How brave and macho do you have to be to slip through windows in the dead of night and shoot and kill and rape people while they're asleep in their beds? These are not tough guys. They're cowards and bullies who prey on people who can't fight back. Always. That's what, serial killers don't go after people who can defend themselves, they go after people, that titillate their sexual appetites, and they know they can defeat. They know that, and then it's never a fair fight with a serial killer. So, when the whole Richard had a good shtick going, and I think he was a very bright young man. If you were to do an IQ test on him, he's probably pretty smart. But he had this whole this whole demonic shtick that it was sort of well rehearsed. Certainly during my interview, I mean, it was like he was doing talking points and didn't want to answer questions. So I found him to be sort of a punk, and my inclination while I was sitting there was jump over the table and kick his ass but
you're angry.
Well, you know what, there was a little, and it wasn't a good interview. I mean, I don't think it was one of my better interviews. I went in a little pissed off. I had just spent time with a guy named Bill Carnes, who Richard was one of Richard's last victims. Bill was laying in bed with his fiancee one night in Mission Viejo, and Richard slips in, shoots Bill 3 times in the head while he's sleeping, and then rapes and ravages his girlfriend, and tells her, "Tell him the Night Stalker was here." He's a pompous punk. Ruined these people's life. This poor guy was left with 3 bullet holes, wounds in his head. He had traumatic brain injury. He was being cared for at this group home. His beautiful young nieces came to see him the day I was visiting him, and he was out pushing them on a swing, this badly paralyzed, disabled guy. And he said, I'm not going to let Richard Ramirez take the uncle away from my nieces. And I went in to do that interview thinking about that. And I was totally pissed off, and it wasn't a good interview. And I've learned from that, and I would never. You can't bring those in because it screws it up. It's like money. You just you want to go in and do your job. And
so
I was I was pissed. I was definitely pissed.
So that's funny you're saying that, because one of my questions is, what did you learn from that? And but maybe not visiting the family beforehand, so you're not as emotionally attached?
No, I don't think. I think information is always good, and I postponed. When I first got interacted with Richard, had been tried and convicted of 14 murders. He'd already been tried for a whole slew of crimes. The trial had gone on for 4 years. Ramirez was a very famous serial killer when I got hooked up with it. All the LA stuff had gone on. He'd been transported up to the Bay Area to stand trial for another murder, a 14th murder and an attack in San Francisco. So he's sitting in a little jail, not in a prison, so the access was easier, waiting to be tried for this. He's already convicted of 14 homicides, but he's in a jail in a shitty area of San Francisco.
That was for the Peter Pan trial, right?
Yeah. Right, I think that's right. And so exactly that. And the attack on Mr. Pan. And so he's sitting there, and I got hooked up with him, and he agreed to an interview, but I wanted to go and spend some time with. I needed to get a sense for what this guy was about. I knew all the headlines. I knew, the pentagram on the hand and all of that bullshit.
Well, let me ask you this: do you really think that he's satanic? Because or does he do it for the shock value?
I'm not a big believer. I'm not a big believer.
Because I listen to like a lot of metal music and stuff, and a lot of those guys like they claim to be satanic, but they're not. It's more like for the shock value of it. Does that make sense? I feel like when he was doing those things, I see that in other people. Like he's not really satanic. He's just trying to shock people.
It was a good shtick, and he got a good audience, and he had 1,000 groupies who loved him. So it clearly was working for him. And again, like when I sat down to the interview, he literally had talking points. Whatever I was going to ask him, he was going to read talking points. So that also sort of got my juices flowing. And at the end of the day, it is a widely cited interview. Not one of my better, not one of the ones I'm most proud of, but certainly, I still go back and I think, look and try to, because I agree with you. I'm more interested in how did we get to making of a Richard Ramirez, and a horrific backstory, a terrible childhood, an uncle who was a Vietnam vet who was probably, by his own description, was sort of a serial killer of Asian women when he was in Southeast Asia. So this is the sort of toxic, nest that Richard came from, and so I don't think it's not surprising that he went off the rails with a guy like Ramirez. It's just the surprises to the extent to which they go.
Yeah. Well, what's equally intriguing is how you got the interview. I'm sure everyone in the world wanted to interview this guy, but your dedication to, I guess you met one of his girlfriends out front.
Yeah, he had a whole bunch of groupies, and I wouldn't be surprised. I think current affair may have slipped her a couple of bucks. I'm not going to lie about that. Again, I tried to stay completely separate from that, but she was sort of acting as, I think, the go-between, and whether they paid her for some photographs or whatever. But again, I tried to stay as far away from that as I could. And all I know is that somebody set up the interview, and I made contact. We got word in media from in San Francisco that women were fighting outside this jail to get inside to see Ramirez while he's awaiting trial. And so my guys from Current Affairs sent me up to San Francisco. And it wasn't hard to find these gals. They were literally out front. One of them was a stripper. One of them was a porn star. One of them was an older middle-aged woman who had sat on Ramirez's jury in in L.A., found him guilty, and now had fallen in love with him and followed him up to
that is
San
so
Francisco.
Crazy.
But the one of the gals, we sort of became friends. She took me in. Richard sort of, was willing to do it. Going into the San Francisco jail was a trip in and of itself. Seeing a sort of a strip show in the visiting chambers with inmates and visitors, but
like through glass.
Yeah, it was a funny story. But he agreed to the interview, and as soon as I got the green light, I jumped on the airplane to the Midwest and spent a little time with Bill Carnes, because I felt like I had to know that before I went in and let Ramirez start, giving me whatever line he was going to give me about it. I wanted to know the truth about what he had done.
Bang!